19 years ago, Boston, Massachusetts completed the Big Dig, one of the most complex and expensive highway engineering feats in American history. The project, which took 24 years to complete, rerouted the elevated central artery of Interstate 93 into the O'Neill Tunnel and built the Ted Williams Tunnel to extend Interstate 90 to Boston Logan International Airport. By rerouting through traffic beneath the city's surface, Boston reclaimed this massive swath of urban core land back from mid-century car centricity. The land atop the lid gave way to 27 acres of new public parks, dramatically reduced downtown traffic, and created billions in adjacent real estate value. The project was over budget, over schedule, and politically brutal, but it was correct. The question for other American cities today is not whether to bury downtown highways, but which cities can actually pull it off, and how. In this video, I'll take you through the 5 cities that I think could make the best case for burying, capping, or perhaps even dismantling their downtown highways altogether. Now, yeah, most, if not all of these projects are somewhat far-fetched. American cities just aren't prioritizing this kind of infrastructure redevelopment. Actually, the opposite. We're building and expanding, meanwhile our downtowns are choking and dying. They're starved for infill and redevelopment, small businesses and green space, and just overall better urbanism. In the first place, these highways got jammed through city centers in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and planners at the time basically just decided that moving cars fast was more important than, neighborhoods. By putting highways underground in these dense areas, you're basically creating new real estate from scratch. And that is highly valuable, especially if cities are able to capture that land value for public use. Where these highways and interstates were built to split complete neighborhoods in two, a big dig can be the glue to reconnect them once and for all. It would be an uphill battle, fighting from City Hall to the state capitol to Washington, D.C. Cities would have to apply for federal grants, special programs for reconnecting split neighborhoods. They'd have to create new tax districts to offset upfront costs. But Boston has shown it can be done, and on a large scale too. So here's how I would do it in 5 different cities. First up, I-345 in Dallas, Texas. I-345 is arguably the single best candidate for highway burial in America right now, and it might be even smarter to remove it altogether. This 1.3-mile elevated stub has separated downtown Dallas from the neighborhood of Deep Ellum since it was constructed in 1973. Deep Ellum is one of Dallas's most important historical neighborhoods, best known for being among the first commercial districts for African Americans and European immigrants and housing the city's largest collection of commercial storefronts since the early 1900s. It faded into decay and neglect during the 1970s, but has recently seen a resurgence in investment with new businesses and infrastructure attracting a younger, sort of hipster crowd. It's Dallas's equivalent to Miami's Wynwood or Denver's Rhino neighborhood. Some life and a lot of adaptive reuse, but it's still choked with that lack of mixed-use density that those other neighborhoods have built. I-345 is already showing its age, and the Texas Department of Transportation has studied both highway removal and highway tunneling options, but they haven't taken any action yet. People do want to move to Dallas's urban core. It's why places like Uptown, Bishop Arts, and the Design District have become so popular. Dallas is attracting business and new residents with its 0% state income tax, sports scene, and job opportunities. Dallas also has a booming real estate market that could generate enormous tax increment financing revenues from the land unlocked above the buried I-345. I propose the city bury the entirety of the interstate spur, dismantling the elevated structure and tunneling it beneath downtown Dallas along the same alignment. Dallas's Big Dig would carry a hefty upfront cost, but would generate enough land value and tax revenue to more than pay back the premium over 20 to 30 years, maybe even sooner. Upon completion of Dallas's Big Dig, the city must fast-track permitting to build what comes next. As for what that could look like, I have a few ideas. A linear park would be nice, but downtown Dallas is already well connected to the trails along the Trinity River. Honestly, there's just way too much freed up land for that to be the only use for the new lid. The northernmost section, flanked by the Arts District and the Bryan Place neighborhood, calls for a mixed-use transition zone, I like the idea of greenway trail infrastructure connected to a central park, with community-facing mid-rises that include a carve-out for affordable housing, something around 15 to 20%. There's already so much dead space here, just ripe for redevelopment, and a project like this could even give birth to a whole new neighborhood of its own. All of the freed-up land south of Bryant Street would be zoned to allow for new, dense, mixed-use housing. It would act as that connective tissue to stitch back together the main Elm and Commerce Street corridors that were sliced by the interstate. New housing here means new investment in Deep Ellum, which would hopefully mean a second wave of new urbanist infill and redevelopment there. I also like the idea of a new streetcar loop running along Yonge Street and Canton, or Commerce Street, stopping at Union Station on its west end, and somewhere along the lid in Deep Ellum to the east, with new TOD being built all throughout. Second, I-277 through Charlotte, North Carolina. The proposal here is to bury the John Belk Freeway. That's I-277 and US 74, also signed as the Andrew Jackson Highway, from the Iron District around South Clarkson Street on the west to Elizabeth Avenue on the east. The tricky part in Charlotte is that half of the 1.8-mile segment is below grade and half of it is elevated above grade. I still think the whole thing should just be dismantled and put underground. Charlotte, like Dallas, is one of those cities exploding in population growth, and tying back its most popular urban core neighborhoods in the South End and Midtown back with Uptown in a way that simultaneously introduces green space, new housing, and better road infrastructure would be invaluable for the long-term health of the urban core here. The western anchor of the project is the Iron District, a 55.5-acre former Charlotte pipe and foundry site at South Clarkson Street. The Iron District is already being planned as a large-scale, mixed-use, transit-oriented development served by the Lynx Silver Line, a major proposed east-west light rail corridor connected to the airport. Right now, the Iron District is a bit of an island. Cover I-277 and the site can begin to form some continuity with the growing 3rd Ward and South End neighborhoods in a single infrastructure move. The key here would be to get the revenue mechanism in place before the development value accrues entirely to private owners without any capture for the public infrastructure investment. For the land on top, I would really just like to see more housing and infill, something to bridge the gap between Uptown, South End, the Iron District, the stadium area, and the Little Sugar Creek Greenway. Okay, third, I-84 in Hartford, Connecticut. A big dig for downtown Hartford's I-84 is especially interesting today, considering the city has to make a decision on what to do with this thing as soon as possible. It was built throughout the 1960s and has slowly been deteriorating since the 1980s. Now, doing a big dig in a place like Hartford would be a lot different than doing it in Dallas or Charlotte. Hartford isn't nearly as wealthy, large, or prosperous as the two cities. The city itself has been slowly losing population since the 1970s, whereas Charlotte and Dallas have been gaining. While the city is planning what it calls 10 transformative projects in preparation for its 400th anniversary in 2035, with better neighborhood urbanism within and around the downtown core, there aren't any concrete plans to actually bury I-84, or at least cover it, but there should be. My vision is a two-pronged solution with two main objectives. First, covering I-84, which is mostly already sunken, from Asylum Avenue under the Connecticut River to somewhere in East Hartford. Simultaneously, this spaghetti mess of an East Hartford interchange should be rerouted entirely. The cost would come in at roughly $4 to $6 billion, again set off by the increase in tax revenue and land values in the long term. And like I said earlier, Hartford is a smaller city of around 120,000 people, and they wouldn't be able to fund the project alone. Federal partners and investment would be essential. Reconnecting the street grid above the lid should focus on pedestrian and cyclist safety and community building. My vision for the lid looks a lot like Boston's Big Dig, a continuous linear park acting as a green buffer zone between the ongoing new urbanist development within the city's Downtown North project and historic downtown. I gotta say, I also like the idea of a light rail line operating on Green Track running through the center of the linear park. A line that might run from, say, Asylum Hill or the West Boulevard Historic District to future development in East Hartford. My vision keeps the Victorian-era Bulkeley Bridge over the Connecticut River and either fully pedestrianizes it or allows for a car-free mixed use. Once Hartford's Big Dig is complete, the project will have attracted thousands of new residents to Hartford's downtown North District, fortified Hartford's river trails and riverfront redevelopment with new green space, protected pedestrian and cycling infrastructure, and light rail. Fourth, I-40 through Nashville, Tennessee. Nashville is one of the fastest growing cities in America, and its downtown is and will always be its main attraction. But the city has a real infrastructure problem going on right in the middle of all this growth. The inner loop of I-40, where it converges with I-65 and I-24 through downtown, functions as a hard wall as of today. My proposal is a big dig from Joe Johnson Avenue southeast to 2nd Avenue south, roughly 1.3 miles of tunnel through the inner loop. The financing case is strong and straightforward. Nashville is adding residents and real estate value at an incredible rate. The city should designate the Joe Johnson to 2nd Avenue South corridor as a TIF district immediately. The development pressure on both sides of the highway, especially adjacent to the Gulch, is already enormous. The cost of full burial would be somewhere around $3 to $7 billion. But for a city growing this fast, with this much latent development value sitting on both sides of the highway wall, the long-term return on that investment isn't even a close question. Once I-40 is buried, the city can begin to transform the lid. Downtown Nashville is genuinely starved of green space, so the lid is where green space has to go first. I'd keep the existing arterials and build the entire lid surface into a continuous greenway. Trails, park space, it'd be mostly quiet and communal. It's a wide expanse, perfect for the hike and bike trails that the city is lacking along its riverfront. If Nashville wants to compete with cities like Austin and Seattle on that front, this needs to be a priority here. The stretch adjacent to the Gulch neighborhood will build upon the new urbanism that has already been constructed here, but will be zoned and planned to where buildings face the greenway rather than any new road infrastructure. Look, I've been visiting Atlanta's Beltline on a bi-weekly basis the past few months, and I've kind of become obsessed with what they're doing here. I just want to see this urbanism replicated all over the country. And can you really blame me? Nashville's Big Dig would also lid the 8th Avenue South corridor, which is huge. And suddenly you would have this uninterrupted swath of new green space facing mixed-use density on both sides of a corridor that is currently decaying. This project would also reconnect Vanderbilt, Belmont, Music Row, and 12 South to the downtown core, with better protected bike lanes and pedestrianization radiating out from the new lid work. Coincidentally, protected bike infrastructure has already been put in place along much of 12 South and de Montbriand, but the Big Dig would complete the network by expanding that investment through the corridors that haven't gotten the same love yet. It would finally give Nashville the kind of walkable, mixed-use connector that a city of this stature and growth rate should absolutely have by now. Before we get into our fifth and final city, I've got two honorable mentions. First, Interstate 405 in Portland, Oregon. The grid here is just too perfect to have a highway running through it. Put it underground and watch Portland build back better urbanism almost immediately. How cool would it be if Portland turned this space into an uninterrupted linear park above grade? I've been to this part of Portland a lot recently, and I really think the only thing this part of the city is missing is urban green space just like that. Second, I-70 and I-670 in downtown Kansas City, Missouri. Just a brutal amount of interchanges here. Lid the segment to the north and the segment to the south of downtown, and that gets slightly better at least. The neighborhoods of Crossroads and River Market are Kansas City's most valuable urban core assets. Use the lid space to build new housing and better road infrastructure, and watch these places thrive. Okay, my fifth and final proposal started off as just I-375 in Detroit, Michigan. But I think downtown Detroit calls for something a little more innovative. I'd like Detroit to bury their entire inner loop highway system around downtown. Before Detroit was known as Motor City, and before it was absolutely decimated by car-centric redevelopment and highway construction, it was one of America's greatest cities for people and car-free mobility. Detroit was known as the Paris of the Midwest in Victorian-era and City Beautiful-era America. Its grid, its greenery, its streetcar system, its architecture, its people, its downtown. It was peak turn-of-the-century America, and I think it's time we reclaim that. I see a project called the Detroit Greenbelt. It would function like Atlanta's Beltline in a lot of ways, just built atop a now buried highway, instead of abandoned rail corridors. Downtown Detroit is only like a mile wide, and I think turning the lid into a continuous pedestrian, cyclist, and possibly light rail loop would be the best course of action. Not only would this kind of development create new pockets of infill within neighborhoods like Corktown, Foxtown, and Greektown, it would also act as this self-contained and whole system, sort of like a superhighway for everything and everyone but the automobile. The regreening alone would be something special to see. It would physically look a lot like a beltline or a highline or an underline with its own greenbelt-oriented urbanism, but would also work as a funnel to and from the downtown and the surrounding urban core. Like Nashville, this would also mean better protected bike infrastructure within the uber-wide arteries that already exist here. By reworking Detroit's wide arterials for pedestrian and cyclist mobility, and burying the highways looping around downtown, you're attacking the car problem on two fronts at the same time. The potential here is limitless, and a project like this would be truly unprecedented. It would be expensive, but it would be so worth it in the long run. Like I said at the top, the Big Dig in Boston was sort of a hot mess. But today, nobody in Boston is looking at the new green space and wishing they had the elevated highway back. Not a single person. Because it was the right thing to do. And that sentiment rings true in downtowns across the US. We can take back our cities, severed by 20th century planning, and stitch them back together with better urbanism. We're at a point now where the highways in Dallas, Hartford, Detroit, Nashville, and Charlotte are urban liabilities. We can either spend billions replacing them and widening them with the same or even worse car-centric walls that caused the decay in the first place, or we can use the Big Dig as a blueprint and a lesson to build upon nationwide. Anyway, I'll see you next week, right here, from 4th Place.